Welcome to Franchise Secrets. Today I had a fun conversation with Raj Patel. He owns almost 100 franchise locations with Dunkin' Donuts, Dave's Hot Chicken, and other brands. One of his franchisors told him, "We want franchisees to make so much money, they're fighting to grow. They're fighting to open up more locations and to buy more territories." We got into the challenges and opportunities within the food industry. While there's so many that are in franchising that are outside of food, I wanted to understand the food industry a little bit more. We got into unit level economics and why franchisors should care about that, why some franchisors really care and help franchisees with their profitability rather than just expanding the number of territories sold. Hope you enjoyed this conversation with Raj.
Representing Franchise Secrets, Erik Von Horn.
Raj, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Erik. Glad to be here.
So you're a second generation franchise guy. You got a ton of Dunkin' Donuts, some Dave's Hot Chicken, and you got a really interesting story and a pretty big empire. So where do you want to start? Let's start. How'd you get involved in franchising, or probably better yet, how did your family get involved in franchising?
Yeah, so my dad actually bought his first Dunkin' in 1988. I wasn't even one. So my dad immigrated to America. When he immigrated to America, he ran hotels. He was a hotel manager for a hotel that my uncle actually owned. And after a little bit of bouncing around, he settled in Marion, Illinois for a bit, where I was born. And the opportunity arose for him to buy Dunkin' in Naperville. And, I always claim born and raised in Naperville, moved up there when I was like 4 months old. So I don't know a ton of the Southern Illinois vibe, but I've been in Naperville since. So that's kind of how it started. And then probably over the next 20 to 30 years, he grew it from 1 to 8, completely different Dunkin' world back then, right? You were baking the donuts inside of the restaurants or frying the donuts inside of the restaurants. Each location is produced for itself. Whereas today you got the commissary. So I'd always say growth was a little harder back then, not only from an operational standpoint, but from a financial standpoint as well, than it is today in the Dunkin' world. And then I guess me personally, I'm a U of I-er, double majored in accounting and finance, graduated in 2010, and graduated into obviously the downturn when with all the subprime mortgage stuff and everything going on. So in my world that I graduated out of, it was really the big four that were hiring, and audit and tax wasn't really something that I was interested in. So I graduated. I got introduced to a litigation consulting firm. I did that for legitimately 2 months, where we were hired by the banks. We were going in and we were valuing companies that families had built over generations for the bank to basically take away and resell, and that really wasn't my thing. I mean, the stories from that 2-month period alone were crazy, and from there, Jersey Mike's was looking to enter the Chicago market, and I guess the rest is history, really. Jumped to the Jersey Mike's world. We grew the brand. We went from 0 locations to 12 locations. Sold out to kind of refocus on Dunkin', and here we are today.
How many Dunkins do you have now?
Mid-90s, so we're like 94. Another one opened up today. I was just talking about it yesterday. So we opened up on Noblesville, Indiana today. So we'll be hitting 95 now. You can
break 100 this year?
It's going to be close. I mean, I feel like there's a curveball with construction every single day now. We always talked about the last 5 years with operations and just finding people there. I mean, we're facing the same thing now with construction and development. So we're going to get close. If not this year, next year for sure, we'll definitely get over that 100 Dunkin' mark.
I want to go back a little bit. When you graduated college, doesn't sound like you were really wanting to get into the family business necessarily. Like that wasn't the plan. Was that the plan at some point in the future? Was that accelerated, or because getting into entrepreneurship is different than going into a big five, and then getting into entrepreneurship with family can be a bit tricky too. I know my parents they said, we never want to get in business with you, Erik, because they just heard bad things about being in business with family. Until I started to bring them certain deals, I'm like, it makes sense. And then they're like, oh, wow, I'm bringing different deals to them, and I had something to offer. And then we went into business together, and it worked out really well for many, many years. But their mindset was, we don't want to mix business and family, until they did, and it was good. So how was that with you growing up and then going to college?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because it was never really discussed growing up, right? We never really talked about, hey, we're building this to pass down or anything like that. The culture, the Indian culture in general is you're raised, you're supposed to get really good grades, and you're supposed to be a doctor, a lawyer, or engineer. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. And then ironically, the three things that I'm not good at all. So it was one of those things where I've never a science guy. The engineering stuff was just kind of boring to me. So as I navigated my own way, I knew that it had something to do with numbers. And when I went down to U of I, U of I at the time, and it still is, it's a top 2 or 3 public accounting school in the nation. That's kind of the path that most expect people to take. And I think going into it, that was probably the thought. But as it was never really a conversation that was had until afterwards. And even at that point, when the Jersey Mike stuff started happening, it was like, hey, we're just jumping in, be first. It wasn't one of those things where it was like a drawn out conversation or anything along those lines. I always go back to this. My dad's mentality as we were growing up, or even as I was like, graduating college and going into something different, was, you don't need to have the most number of locations to make the most amount of money. You get your 10, 12 locations, and you just operate, the heck out of them, and you can make as much as you can on 30 or 40. It took me a while to get him over that hump, but once it was over that hump, it was just, we just kind of went after it, and obviously ended up where we are today. So
that's a good and bad thing about that, because a lot of people in the franchising world, more is always better. It doesn't matter how slim the margins are. And I know that you care about margins and profitability, but what's the balance? So, it's not having 100 locations. It's about having 100 really good locations, and you're about ready to hit that mark. But what's the balance, would you say, or what did you learn from him that were kind of takeaways that you're grateful for with him wanting like really good, profitable, healthy locations versus just a large number? Because it sounds like you kind of married the two and have a really good recipe.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit it on the head. It was his mentality of every location should be successful. And he never quite said it. He said what I just mentioned about the 10 locations and just operating the best you can. But we kind of took that and turned it into every location's got to be able to sustain itself. Now you've got different figures with like, hey, how much debt are you taking on per location, or, things like that. But when it comes to a straight EBITDA standpoint, it's always been our mentality. We don't want to open up a location just to open up a location. It's got to open up a location that's going to make money financially. And, there's times when you get to the 50, 60 unit mark where you may take a location on where, pre-debt, you're not making the cash flow you really want to, but in that 5 or 7 year mark, you can. But that's really after you pay off the initial structure or the initial, chunk of location. So that was more his philosophy, in the sense of every location's got to be successful. And then I remember when we were starting, you'd open up a Jersey Mike's, or you'd open up a Dunkin, and they don't cash flow day one. This is in 12 and 13. I mean, you're talking about Dunkin and Jersey Mike's, two of the greatest brands in the world today. They were still, they were good back then, but they were still in growth mode. You're still trying to figure them out, really what they were going to become. So today you can open Jersey Mike's, Dunkin, and make money day one. But when you look at it from back in the day, it wasn't like that. So he every time he'd be like, all right, hey, we've got to hit payroll. Got to move, X amount of dollars over. That was always a conversation that you didn't want to have. And that kind of steered that mentality of, all right, let's figure out to make sure every single one makes money, so we're not ending up in a spot where we've got 500 locations and we're making money at 50 of them. So I completely agree. Bigger is not always better. It's smart growth. We're definitely beneficiaries of a great economy in 2010s and such. We're definitely beneficiaries of that entire world. But when it comes to the, hey, is bigger always better? No, honestly, almost the exact opposite. It's you eventually hit a threshold where you can't operate them successfully. You can't operate them efficiently. And that's where you see a lot of these, larger franchisees that you see in the news that are, going bankrupt or something along those lines. But there's also some that do it great, so it's really a balancing act.
Jersey Mike's, did you do all those from the ground up for an open territory and then build them out?
Yeah.
And then who'd you sell to? Is it like private equity, just another franchisee?
Yeah, just another franchisee in the system. It was actually one of our partners that bought us out, so.
Attention, franchisors and franchisees. There are two really important resources that I want to share with you that will help you avoid costly mistakes and increase your enterprise value. The first is our free Facebook group. It's a community that has over 4,000 franchisees and franchisors in it. When somebody asks a question, they get honest and authentic answers from multiple perspectives. You can join the group for free over at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. The second resource I want to share with you is if you're a franchisor and you're frustrated that you're not awarding as many franchises as you thought you would, this is the reason I created the Franchisor Mastermind. If you want access to the information, the techniques that the best franchise sales organizations are using to award franchises, and you want what mature brands have with their playbook of having happy, successful franchisees that grow the right way, then you might want to check out the Franchisor Mastermind. The reason why people join is they want access to my Rolodex, my connections. They want the playbook to achieve both short-term and long-term success. They want to increase enterprise value in their brand. Links will be in the show notes or at scalablefranchise.com. Let's talk about that having an exit. I don't know how meaningful that exit was, but I'm guessing with a dozen of those or around a dozen of those, it was fairly meaningful. So you could take that capital and it could accelerate growth in Dunkin or something else. So talk about, someone's wondering like, I wonder if I should sell a piece of my portfolio over here and then use that cash to be able to put into something else that's already working for them or another brand or something where they can accelerate growth. So was that helpful? That capital helpful?
Absolutely. I mean, there's either the timing piece where you wait till you pay off that a little bit to get some cash, or you got to make an exit in order to refocus. For me, it was a little bit of both. I always get asked, hey, if there's other brand I'd jump into, what would it be today? I'd be like, I'd jump back into Jersey Mike's. I think they've got a great recipe. I think they've got a great brand. But when we exited out of Jersey Mike's, it was a twofold approach. One, we needed the cash to really spearhead the Dunkin' growth, and two, we just needed the focus. We didn't have, we had normal debt levels. We didn't have, we had normal growth plans. And if you're growing between 80-20 financing and 70-30 financing, you've got to make sure every single location works. So as we did that, we just needed to reshift our operational focus in order for us to get over that hump. And, once you get over that hump and you get to that 5-7 year mark that I keep referencing to, that's when you can hire top talent. You can't afford top talent when you're in growth mode unless you're really going to make sure that they're not going to work. So it falls back on one of you two.
Let's talk about your superpowers, your dad's superpowers, and the other key players that might be family. And then let's talk about top talent, hiring those A+ players. So what are your superpowers? What are your dad's superpowers?
Interesting question. So I'd say that if you look at how we're structured today, we do split up tasks. We don't double up on anything, almost anything. There's some things that obviously, are inevitable. You both kind of handle, but my dad is more focused on store level economics. He's really focused on, all right, hey, making sure that scheduling is correct, labor is correct, donuts and all that kind of stuff. He's really on top of that Dunkin' Chicago world, right? So we've got about 45 to 47 units. He's really the guy spearheading that on that end. And I feel like on my end, it's more the big picture and really the growth plans, right? But going back to day one, my dad still delivered payroll checks to every single location, and that's just a basic thing, right? But figuring out how we can put the correct technology in place, because that's a word that no one ever wants to hear from the old school days, to allow us to grow. And but to everyone's credit, like once you adapt, it opens up all kinds of doors. And then it's also, me putting together the correct organization structure, the correct people piece, things like that, getting the right people into place. And then he's really handling that store level, making sure the organization's moving in the right direction, things like that. So, he doesn't really, bother too much with the Dunkin Indiana world, where we've got a partner that really helps operate, spearhead that market. And then the Dave's world as well. He's not overly involved in the operations or anything like that as well.
You said something that's important. I want to go back to the question about hiring A-plus talent. You mentioned he's focused on store level unit economics or store level, making money at the stores. From a franchise brand perspective, Dunkin or Dave's Hot Chicken or, Jersey Mike's, like, how much do you hear the franchisors talking about unit level economics? Because us at Front Street Equity Partners, that's something that we are always talking to our brands about. How are the franchisees going to make more money? How are they going, whether it's more marketing or, cutting expenses here or leveraging this piece of technology, whatever it is, we are always focused on our franchisors having better unit level economics. What do you hear from the brands with that? How much do they help with that?
Really good question. And I feel like everyone is kind of involved during COVID, right? I still remember, so I'm on the back for Dunkin and for Dave's, which is just the franchisee council or the franchisee committee that kind of helps negotiate, helps lead the brands with the franchisor. And every week during COVID, and I'm going to talk Dunkin specific here because Dave's was still at one location during COVID. We signed up when there was one, so a little bit different. But we would have, we'd have a little, not chart, but a little PowerPoint slide that would go up, and the third or fourth point was EBITDA. Right, we talk sales comps, we talk ticket growth, and we talk transaction growth, and then EBITDA. So EBITDA has always been on the forefront in the Dunkin' world. I've been involved in Dunkin' for probably 12, 13 years now. I don't know what it was like when my dad got involved. If I had to guess, back in the day, the franchisors and the franchisees weren't always aligned. So I assume that there wasn't really any talk of EBITDA. I think since I've been involved, the leadership at Dunkin' has put a focus on it, has put a focus on ROI and things along those lines. So I can say for a big brand, that's pretty impressive. I don't think that, as you look at the news and you hear all the earnings of companies and such coming up, you don't always hear them talk about franchise level profitability. And really, if you're going to grow, that's what you want. And then you go to the Dave side, where we signed on, like I had mentioned, there was one location. Dave, everyone was how'd you pick Dave's? Like, what was it? And for us, Dunkin' was the engine, and we wanted another brand that was really going to help us grow. And we got lucky by picking, to me, the best emerging brand in the country. Their store level economics are insane. You're talking a brand that's doing $3 million in volume out of a 2,500 square foot box. No one's heard of that. So, same thing with them. When we get on these quarterly Zooms, EBITDA is always mentioned. And the CEO of the company and the president of the company actually say, hey, we know the only way we're growing is if franchisees are making more money. And I still remember this quote from Jim Biddix. He called me probably 3 weeks ago, and he goes, I want franchisees to make so much money that they're fighting to grow, that they're arguing with us to grow. He goes, that's how much money I want them to make. And he goes, that's what our focus is. And, I can't tell you that's ever said by brands, right? It's how many locations can we grow? And Dave's growth strategy kind of reflects that. They're not opening up locations every 3 or 4 miles. As we go through stage one, they're going every 10 miles. And it goes back to that point that Jim made that Bill emphasizes on every single call is that we want franchisees to make this kind of dollar, because that's what gets us to level 2 and level 3 growth. So I can tell you I'm lucky. I can tell you it's a question I ask when I get into brands. I go, what are your franchisees making? Because you look at some of these FDDs and you see the P&Ls for the corporate stores, royalties aren't always in it. So you see, 10, 12% EBITDA, and I'm like, well, after royalties and marketing, there's nothing left. So it's very important to us. And luckily the brands that we're in, there is an emphasis on it.
That's great. Let's, I want to come back to a little bit of that too. Especially, you're part of an emerging brand, which I think you picked the right horse there. And then this just big brand that's been around forever and just has loyal customers. So I want to kind of compare and contrast that. But I want to wrap up the talent part, because you mentioned you got to a certain point where you were able to hire, really, really good talent. I want you to explain to the audience, like, what is really good talent and what does it take to get them? Because somebody might be thinking, oh, that's a an $80,000 a year position, a really good manager. But I'm thinking you are probably have those, or that type of person. But when you think of when you got to the point where you were able to hire really good talent because you had the capital to do it, and you had the opportunity for someone to go in there and be challenged and to get in a role that fits them, what kind of talent is that, and how do you find them?
So I always reference when I talk to anybody, even when I'm talking to some younger people that are looking to get into the franchise world. When we started growth, we would hire somebody at 40 or 50,000 that should have been paid 80 to 100,000 because we just simply could not afford them. Right. So you're looking for someone, you're looking for a body to just come in and work, and the rest would fall back on you. And that is not, what growth is supposed to be about. It's not effective, but it's sometimes you're forced into it. But then we also had my dad and I to pick up a lot of the leftovers and figure things out. Now today, you're able to pay somebody a little more, or you're able to, just from the financial aspect. But even more important than the financial aspect is how they fit in with the rest of the team. So I can tell you, I've talked to probably 2 or 3 people in the last month that are just rock star operators that do great for some of these bigger brands that I know wouldn't fit in our culture. And it's more so the personalities wouldn't mesh, things along those lines. And then conversely, a lot of people will hire, single union or multi-union managers that have only ran 4 or 5 restaurants and expect them to run 20 or 30. When it's just, that falls back on the franchisee as well. The correct systems got to be in place, and there's not always that transition. So when it comes to if you're looking for somebody that's really, in my opinion, that's really good, that's experienced, they're going to be asking you those questions. And honestly, as you go through these interviews, you actually get better for your organization. Because like when I interview somebody, I'm taking 1 or 2 things away. If there's a really good interview, then I go, oh, I should probably implement that, or oh, I should probably take a look at that. And that's why, having interviews and doing this, that's kind of how you get the talent piece of it. And then you've got to figure out the personality piece of it. I mean, I can tell you every single person in a director or VP role with us, we didn't get through a recruiter. We went out and kind of like, we met somebody and we go, hey, that person would fit perfectly. Not saying that's the only way to do it, right? But we've had more success doing that. Whereas you're going through your interview and you're meeting people at some of these shows at, Restaurant Finance or Multi-Unit or something, and just keeping things in mind as you kind of grow. Got a call later on with another brand that just came to the area, the VP that's kind of brought 7 units to the market, and he's not happy, right? Because as these companies they come in so fast, they're expecting you to run these private equity numbers when it's just not sustainable with growth, right? You've got to give a few points to make numbers work. So for us, we've not handpicked, but we've gone after who we think would fit the best versus, we don't want to be in a position where today we're crap, we're entering this market, let's go find 4 people, and you make the wrong hire. We've done that too, right? So it's really every conversation you have, anywhere you are, out to eat dinner, kind of always in the back of your mind, like, hey, that person would be pretty good. We should have a conversation with them later. But that's kind of been our strategy.
So you've got Dunkin and you've got Dave's. It sounds like you got good leadership at both. How did you pick Dave's, or was it, you don't have to give me other brands, but were you deep in due diligence with other brands, or was it only Dave's?
A mix of that. So we knew, or I shouldn't say we knew, when we were sitting around, when I was looking at what was next, I knew I wanted to get into that chicken brand. I didn't know what that brand was going to be. I can tell you that we looked at a lot of them, but Dave's honestly kind of just fell into our lap. It was one of those things where we were out there looking. The recruiter that was recruiting for a VP of development position was recruiting. So someone that I knew that was a VP of development for a brand got recruited by a recruiter for Dave's, and he's like, hey, you should check this brand out. And I'm like, what is it? And he's like, well, there's Dave's in California. Ironically, my wife and I were actually going out there for a trip in 2 weeks. So I'm like, yeah, I'll look at it, but really not looking for anything because we had just entered Indiana for Dunkin. So our hands were kind of full at that point. So as we kind of went through it, I had the food, and the one thing I knew is that the food had to travel well. And that was kind of my only requirement. It'd be really good food, but it had to travel well. And it hit that right off the bat. So then we started due diligence. In the past, we've gotten into brands that just don't have leadership that knows the franchise world, that's done it before. And honestly, at this point, we're not looking to do that again. Right? We're not looking to help, not help, I shouldn't say, we're not looking to figure out what direction the brand is going as the leadership kind of figures it out, right? With Dave's, you've had leadership that has done it before multiple times. So they knew what the franchise world was about. They knew what the franchisee interaction, gives and takes and things were about. And that's kind of how it all played into, I guess, got put into effect. And, initially we signed a 5-store deal, then went to a 10-store deal, then went to a 21-store deal. And now we're up to, I think, a 28-store deal with them. And we've got, 6 open, 6, I'd say 3 under construction, 3 in architecture. So it's one of those things where we like it. I'd rather grow with them than figure out another brand or something to bring it into the fold.
So how many locations did they have open when you bought it?
1. So Dave's had 1 location open.
One.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to, just to be clear of that. So wasn't like a lot of people know about Dave's today, but back then, and still a lot of people probably don't know about Dave's compared to Dunkin, but they didn't have branding. So, I mean, they had good branding, I'm assuming, but you coming from the Dunkin world knew what great branding and longevity was like. How important was the future of their brand and branding to you as you were in due diligence with them?
Oh, it was everything. I mean, when I got introduced into the Dave's world, it was something completely different, right? It was like they were just starting the franchise world. The new leadership had been in effect for maybe 2 or 3 months, but I met Bill in Vegas at Restaurant Finance, and he told me the vision. He told me how I was going to lay out. He told me what he was going to try to do, and he did it to his credit. He brought in the right people. He put it all into place. I mean, I still remember when I signed up with the 1 location, Bill had just started, and I go, "Hey, can I have the logo?" And it was like one of those Dropbox logo files, right? That's how new they were, and within within a year, he had entire team in place. They obviously went into a huge loss because they were bringing in VPs of construction, VPs of COO, all this kind of stuff, and he ate that cost up front. Now, because he's done it before, he realized how important it was. If I would have went into another brand that had 1 location with leadership that's never done it before, we'd be in a different spot right now where if we got the 200 locations as fast as Dave has, none of the infrastructure would be in place. And, we were that was very important to me because I've been a part of things where they've kind of fallen apart just because the brand didn't stay ahead of things. So 1 location's not, I mean, I still wouldn't say, hey, go do it. I mean, it was one of those things where sometimes you get lucky, and we ended up a little lucky here.
But that's why you didn't go all in. You bought enough to test it out.
Right.
And then, like you said, within a year, he'd put into place what he kind of told you he was going to. And so there's trust that was built there. You ever tempted to go outside of food? Because a lot of people that listen to the podcast, they're, a lot of consultants, brokers, service-based people, health, fitness, and a lot of that's my world. I'm not into food. That's why I love having, smart people like you on the podcast, because we can learn a lot. Have you ever been tempted to go outside of food? I
have, and we flirted with it a bit. I think, we're in the Tide world. It's very interesting because it's like even going from like fast casual to like full service. It's a different person. It's a different operation. It's a different world. If I went from my QSR fast casual world to non-food, it's a different person. It's a different world. And for me to continuously replicate that as a speed we're growing with the Dunkins and the Daves, I think would be a lot right now, unless we really had a key person. In the Tide world, we'll slowly grow, maybe a unit a year or something along those lines. But it's not something that we did it back in the day. I've taken a couple swings and misses. And right now I'd say I'm focused solely on food, all the way through. So I've looked at it. I know people have made a lot of money doing it, but it's just not something that we've really looked into much lately.
So we think about if you weren't from food and you were from, service-based or other retail, and then food sounded interesting because you go down to multi-unit and you see all these cool new food concepts, and you see, like you fly into Vegas when multi-units going on, and a lot of big food guys are in there, and there's a lot of private jets on the tarmac. So there's a lot of money there, and they're not the franchisors jets. they're franchisees,
Yeah.
sitting there on the tarmac. So there's a lot of money. So I know that there are people that are outside of food that are interested in food, but they're scared to get into it because it's unfamiliar. What are the reasons to be scared about going from, retailer service into food? And what are the reasons not to be afraid of that?
There's a lot of reasons to be scared. There's a lot of reasons not to be scared. I think right now, if I start with the negatives is that back in the day, the last 10 years, $1 million was a really good restaurant. You did $1 million AUV, you were making good money, you were doing it all. Today, with the way construction costs are, with the way rents are, with the way talent is, the cost of those three, $1 million is no longer enough. You've got to be close to that $1.5 million, $1.75 million number. So, and that can't be your top 25% restaurant. That's got to be your entire portfolio. It's got to be at that number. You've got a bunch of restaurants that have closed down recently. Even on those, if they were at $35 a foot with them, they're asking for $50 with the new tenant. And you're competing against some pretty big names as you're growing. You're competing against the Cavas, the Street Greens, and the Chipotles. And as a franchisee, it's hard to compete against them unless you can really sell the landlord on you. I can tell you, I'm maybe 10% ever beating him out. And I don't blame him, right? If I was a landlord and I got a signature from Cava versus me, I'm probably taking Cava, right? So it's one of those things where you've got to be smart, you've got to be quick, and when you want something, you go get it. It's not, hey, I'll worry about that tomorrow. It's, hey, you want to meet in 30 minutes in the city? I'll be there, right? It's one of those things where you've got to react right away to these deals. But conversely, I feel like in general, there's more money getting made in food, in my opinion, than anywhere else if you can figure out the right brands and the right structure. It's a 7-year game to me. Get through the first 7 years, and you'll be happy the rest of your life. But that 7-year number is get that initial debt load paid off. And, then don't relever it. Because if you start relevering things, then you're just, the way rates are and everything. Be very focused on the bottom line those first 7 years, and then get rid of that debt load, get some free cash flow, and then you can really explode the growth. You try to do both together, it's very doable, but it's just one of those things where you've got to be a little more cautious. There's a little more give and take.
So Franchise Times recognized you as, I think it was like Dealmaker of the Year. Doing something with Dealmaker of the Year. What was that award, and why do you think they gave it to you?
So that was an interesting award. So this was the first major sale that I was really a part of in the Dunkin' world. So a franchisee was listing 69 units in Chicago market. Dunkin' the way Dunkin' operates is that, let's say you were trying to buy 3 locations next to me, but you had nothing by me. Dunkin' could exercise the deal and move it to me. There's probably 4 or 5 groups really bidding on this deal in general. And so basically you have to get the correct dollar for the seller for what he wanted. And let's just say he wanted $1 million. You have to get Dunkin', you'd make Dunkin' happy operationally, which means that this guy was spread out all over the state. It was wild. Like you had 1.5 hour, 2-hour drives. What we ended up doing is we ended up bringing in 9 different buyer groups to buy those 69 units and submitted purchase and sale agreements for every single one together. So, and then we were keeping Dunkin' in the loop all the way through, making sure that you knew, all right, hey, this person's up here, we're going to be doing this. This person's here, we're going to be doing this. And we were able to, at the last second, kind of pull it through with one last 3 or 4 store group. So it was probably the most complex Dunkin' deal in a while. I mean, probably in history at that point. I mean, now they've gotten even more crazy because you've got a lot larger franchisees at this point. But it was piecing together a lot of pieces. And I think that when I look back on that, it was like, so remember, I had just had my first daughter, and then I'd be, with them during the day, and then we'd be talking to the attorneys at night, trying to figure out how we're going to piece this thing through. And we closed probably like 3 or 4 months after that. But I'd say the complexity of the deal, and whoever wrote that like piece to share to them, which I think was my attorney's like admin, was very impressive because I couldn't even put into words exactly what happened the entire time. It was something we were just, all right, hey, this person here, like everything was going all over, but it was fun. And there's 4 different banks involved for the buyer group. So some of the banks doubled up, but now you've got banks on top of that. Everything had to close within the same couple of days. It was all those complexities that I think led to that award.
The last question. At the time, did you think that you overpaid, paid a fair price, or underpaid for it? And looking back, what do you think?
this is everyone always calls me on this. I thought we overpaid at that point, no doubt. But I feel like that about a lot of things. I feel like that about a house I bought 10 years ago. I feel like that about a lot of things. So when you look back at today, it's probably 70%, 80% value. Dunkins have gone from 900,000 AUVs to 1,400,000, 1,500,000 right now, right? It's a different world. Conversely, EBITDA has obviously been under pressure, but I'd definitely say at the time it was overpaid. Today it was fair value. There's remodels and things that come into play on that end, so you gotta take those numbers for what it's worth. But I'd say everyone in that deal today, I'm just gonna throw it out there because I don't talk to every single person daily, but 90% of them would be happy and glad that they did that deal then. Even though it was a big number. It was one of the biggest multiples at that time.
Raj, I think that, I kind of thought that's what it might be. I had no idea because you and I had never talked about that. But, I know that's the case for, like when I bought my ranch here, thought I overpaid for it. Neighbor came along and said, everyone always thinks I overpay for land. We've got 80 acres. And now, number of years later, it's worth 3 times as much. And so right. I'm just curious if that was a case on a deal, that big deal that you did. So it sounds like it was, and hopefully that helps some people out there. Raj, man, this has been fun. This has been really good. So thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Links to everything can be found over at franchisesecrets.com. And if you want my help with anything from starting your own franchise to growing your current franchise business, please visit scalablefranchise.com.